So, the first panel is the why. So why is this important? So we've already shared with you why we think this is important, and now we're going to be introducing a wonderful panel to discuss that for you and help to take it into a deeper dive with their thoughts as well. So the why, in terms of what we have created here, is that it's time for a global culture change towards a more feminine, symbiotic relationship with each other and the planet, creating a new life paradigm that is thriving, restorative and rejuvenating for all. So I would like to invite our moderator, Andrea Paige, to come up. Let me introduce her to you. Andy works at the cross-section of human physiology and technology. She founded the Institute for Aliveness, offering a Masters of Science in Applied Epigenetics and Preventative Health. They have students representing more than 40 countries in their 18-month program, and she also has a startup working in physiological computing and long-term fasting. She's an emotional intelligence consultant and on the advisory board of several futurist and psychedelic companies. Welcome, Andy.
So we'll have Samira Khan, Valentine Stockdale, is everyone here? Super. And Helena Wasserman. Okay. So hi everyone. Nice to meet you. Gotta love Davos panels. Thank you for that beautiful opening. I just caught the end, but it's an honor to be here after the trek across the chaos to come to this space that seems in the middle of nowhere and settle down and see a full house. So I think my first invitation in inviting in the feminine is allowing everyone to first notice your own breath, your body. Notice how you woke up. And if you have to close your eyes to do that, or if you're rolling your eyes in your head and you're like, why are we doing this? Notice. And notice that by noticing, you're changing your own physiology. So take another deep breath. Loosen your jaw. Yeah. Did you feel that? When you're ready, you can look around to the people to the side of you, and rather than just looking and nodding, spend at least 2 seconds looking into their eyes without any expression. No need to smile, no need to reassure them of anything, just be there. And notice how that feels. Notice that you are a human noticing, and there are other humans noticing back. Oh yeah, we're in the right place. So gorgeous panel. You can have breakfast with them after, it's okay. A little love affair started there. I would love each of you to introduce yourself briefly and say why it is that you're here discussing the importance of the feminine and moving forward in humanity.
Okay. Hi everyone, good morning. Nice surprise to see such a full room. And as soon as I walked in, I could feel the energy, very different energy in here, which feels really nice. Feels very homey. So yeah, I'm Helena. I am building Top Tier Impact, which is a global ecosystem for impact investing and sustainability leaders. We thought quite a lot whether we should come to Davos or not, because obviously it's a very, the WEF is a very criticized place. But we decided that we wanted to be here because we wanted to keep the dialogue open with everyone and also people that we want to engage. So despite a lot of criticism, we decided to come, and we're very happy we did. And we dragged 120 people with us. So we're very happy to be here to have this conversation about impact and to talk about it in a different way, like actually the way you're doing it here, to be more in your heart and be able to move people that way, to get into action, to put their money behind their words. So very excited to be here.
Hi everyone, Samira Khan. I've been working in the tech for impact space, Microsoft, Salesforce, but at heart I'm a creative writer. And I've always really processed my world through sensing. So less verbal, but more sensory experiences. What am I seeing? What am I hearing? That's why I love travel and meeting new people. And so one of the things I've been really trying to bring to my work is a more empathy-driven approach to how we think about the usage of technology, I feel it's not going away, it's here to stay. So want to see how we can bring in more cultural elements to the tech space, into our lives, to really be able to draw from people's creativity. And again, also sort of the leading with the intuition, which I think is often associated with feminine energy.
Is this working? No. Hello. Hi. Good morning, everyone. My name is Valentine Stockdale. My background is mainly corporate finance, and then in 2018 I made a pledge never again to accept money from a brand unless it was working on the Sustainable Development Goals. And my primary focus is helping social and environmental impact companies to reach investment readiness so that they can raise capital effectively. And in the last 14 months I've spent building a tech company called Impact World, which is designed to network the social and environmental impact community to bring it out of its silos and accelerate our collective move towards a holistic and balanced world. I'm super happy to be here today.
So much. So this is the beauty, I think, of House of Balance. I'm starting to realize is that you get people who are actually making tremendous impact in the world and playing in the big leagues, talking about heart space and intuition. And I wanna, before we go deeper into these topics, provide some grounding. As you heard in my intro, I work in physiological computing, and so working in biodata feedback from the human body. And when we talk about the heart space, what we're discussing is the nervous system, the bag of ganglia of nerves around the heart. So some of you may be aware of the Heart Math Institute in California and the research that they've done. And it's really important that we bring ourselves at all times back to our nervous system, because that's where the feminine lies, right? That's where we can actually open the heart space. That's where we can feel safe enough to come back to a space of social engagement, where life can be okay again. And so in some pre-discussion with the panelists, they submitted topics that they might like to talk about, and one of them was integrating Hermetic principles into reality. There was also a desire for discussing real life examples. And so between those two, I'd like to invite you to share anything from your life or anything that you feel would be beneficial to help this rebirth, because it will happen. Right? We don't have to do anything to make it happen. We have to simply be in that space and recognize one another who are also in that space. Yeah.
Thank you. So I'll give a real life example where I felt like in my work, I felt like I used the feminine, and it was extremely beautiful and impactful. So a month ago, I held an investor roundtable in Singapore, where I live. And there was 38 investors in the room, all I would say institutional investors, private equity groups, family offices. It was very corporate, and everybody was very, I would say, extremely formal. And so they're expecting an investor roundtable. And so I kind of did it a little bit differently. So I stood up and I asked everyone in the room, so they're expecting obviously like a business presentation with a PowerPoint and expect why they should invest in this climate fund that I'm presenting to them with some panelists. And so I asked every single person in the room to stand up and say their name, and when was the moment where they started caring about the climate? Like, what happened? Was there an event, something they saw on TV? And literally people started getting up and sharing the most like profound, moving stories about somebody swimming in the sea in Thailand. There was plastic everywhere. Suddenly was like, oh my God, I can't even have grandkids anymore. What's gonna happen? And like, this is like people that were like really not, really in their suits, like not at all, and suddenly connecting with their heart. And so it was so beautiful for me to see people really getting engaged. And literally I looked at the audience and nobody was on their phone. Like for half an hour, everybody was just like drinking the words of the panelists, like just like, what can we do, where can we do it? And it was just so beautiful because there's such a different energy in the room. And I'm feeling a little bit of a similar energy today. So I wanted to, so I thought that was, because I was trying, actually I thought long what were good examples, and I couldn't think of one, but that's the one that I thought was the most powerful. So I want to keep doing it.
I love that example. I mean, on my end, I can share sort of a moment that I'm going through right now. So when I think about, feminine energy and leadership, I often think about gratitude, I think about kindness, I think about empathy, listening. However, what I've noticed is that the quieter voices in the room don't often have the power. So the power structures are not aligned to what we're trying to create. I don't see a chief happiness officer or a chief empathy officer. There's stewards of culture in the corporate sector, but you don't see those jobs. So they're not being, I think these feminine qualities and traits are not being valued in the external marketplace. And what it does inwardly is, I think that it can bend you. And if you bend, a tree branch long enough, it'll eventually break. So I think there's no dearth of strong female, feminine, people who embody feminine qualities, leaders. I think the challenge is really, how do we get people to value it, create opportunity for them, elevate their voices? So any ideas around that, I think, would be really helpful to me as I think through this, because the longer I wait, I feel there's no place in certain spaces for empathy. The CEO of Microsoft just raised everybody's pay because that's what speaks to employees. We are in a crisis of trust, a crisis of resilience, there's market fluctuation, and I agree with that, but people don't pay people for being empathetic. So I think there's a little bit of oppositional forces. So how can we bring more empathy to these spaces, I think is really, really powerful.
Beautiful. About 3 years ago, I was asked to join a company, and our mission was to regenerate indigenous economies. And I was put in charge of kind of streamlining the process of getting large amounts of private capital into indigenous economies. And I began that process thinking that it was all about supporting indigenous business owners and giving them the knowledge and the skills that they needed in order to package up their businesses to be attractive for Mission First family offices. And about 2 years later, what I realized it was kind of the other way around, that they had all the knowledge that we needed in the West. And one of the most interesting things that I learned about their sort of shamanic principles is that pretty much all shamanic traditions, whichever continent they're on, one of the things they have in common is this desire to bring back the feminine to what is ultimately a sort of massively over-masculinized world. And they talk about the eagle and the condor, the eagle being sort of symbolic, the symbol of masculinity, and very, very much on the American flag, and the sort of North American foreign policy being very sort of masculine and very much about going forward and taking and controlling and dominating. And then you have like the sort of absolute polar opposite, which is the nurturing, loving energy of the feminine, and how important it is to bring the condor, which is on multiple flags in South America, the sort of symbol of femininity, back to balance out this very tremendously over-masculinized world. And if you look at the statistics of all of the different sort of major fields, for example, sort of women only play like 12% of the militaries around the world have feminine leaders, and 10 countries in the world have a female head of state, and 12 countries have a female head of government, and 12% of the Fortune 500 companies have a female CEO. It's all sort of either 10 or 12%, and it's like femininity is being pushed away, and it's having an unbelievably detrimental effect on society and the ecosystems around us. So I learned from integrating with these shamanic principles, and that the bringing back of the femininity to this masculinized world is absolutely mission critical for not just us but all species, and it's tremendously important. There's a really, really interesting book called The Kybalion, if anyone's interested to read it, and some people say it's the master key that syncs all the different wisdom traditions. And one of the core principles of the Kybalion, which is Hermetic philosophy, is that the principle of gender, and it's just fascinating, beyond beautiful, and highly, highly recommend anyone who wants to understand, the feminine energy and why balance is absolutely critical to all life systems. So I strongly recommend that.
Thank you. I mean, so I want to kind of ground the themology of what we're talking about. We've been from, indigeneity to chief empathy officers to climate change, and make this relevant to you in your lives, because you live lives which have polarity in them, the polarity of masculine and feminine. It's not only, you and your wife or whatever. It's not gender-based, it's energetic. And so the feminine is receptive. It's anywhere where you feel you can sit back and have things brought to you, right? Where you generate, you birth new things into the world from that space of relaxation. Remember the nervous system regulation. And then the masculine is an action orientation. It's a penetration, really, into existence of what is. It's the doing activity. And so think right now in your lives, panelists, you too, where you are more active, right? And places where you can be more receptive and passive. My guess is here at Davos we have a lot of A-type personalities who are in that active force. Maybe, yeah? So the invitation, I got a little bit back there, an admission. The invitation is to think right now, one or two places in your life where you can be a little more receptive. I'm asking you to make a commitment to yourself, because change starts from inside. I commit to getting more massages. Anyone else? Yeah, where can you be receptive and receive? Yeah. Did you want to share?
Maybe ask a question, or are you waiting until later?
Yeah, sure. Please ask your question.
So I'm wondering whether, to your point, can we be A-types and yet be receptive? Is this not the new paradigm that we might be talking about? So I'm curious to hear.
Yeah, so what does that balance look like? I'll rephrase that question and we'll ask the panelists. Thank you so much. Yeah, so how can we still do but come from a place of having received? What do you think?
I'll give it a shot. Definitely, that's definitely what I'm striving to do. I consider myself as an A-type, but I feel like I can go in and out from being in this go to kind of sit back, take it in. And it's a constant balance of how do you play with both. And I try to think about it, but it's like a little dance. It's like, okay, I'm going in my go, go, go. And then I sit and I look up. And I breathe. And I take it in. And then I go. And then I come back. And that's how I try to apply it. And seeing it as a little dance makes it less mechanical.
I think in theory, I've been thinking about it more from an integration lens. So how can I integrate intuition, which has driven a lot of my, quote, business thinking, but that I've had to justify with logics and approaches and frameworks. How can I integrate more sort of taking things in? Because I think intuition really comes from the soul and the soul energy. And I'm hearing leaders more and more speak about what's missing in the current conversation is more connection to heart, more connection to soul. So I'm trying to hang back, listen, dial it down in terms of nervous energy when it's around me. Much easier in enlightened groups and with enlightened leadership. But I will say it's more theory. I think what's really worked is just chunking my life into different pieces, and sometimes I'm drawing from feminine energy and sometimes I'm just not. But I do think you can take one given effort and project and kind of take the space to employ feminine energy, and then when it's time to act, maybe take a different approach.
I've got a slightly different way to look at it. So obviously I have no choice but to look at it from a slightly different perspective. So I, in the company that I'm building, we are effectively asking all the major impact brands around the world to use us as a supplier of choice. And I was conscious as I was building this company that we were going to be scrutinized, and also that it's my duty as the founder and CEO to love the company and nurture the company as best I possibly can. And as I repeatedly meditated on whether or not it was okay for our company to be led by a man, I repeatedly came back to the same answer, which was no, it isn't. And that I would need a female co-founder. And I remember reading years ago that the only political system that's ever been proven to work is the political system of the family, and that all other political systems have failed and will almost certainly continue to fail. And I remember as I read that, very, very quickly I was like, why, what is it about the family that's unique? And my first reaction was there's both masculine and feminine co-head. And they divide the labour and they divide the responsibilities according to however they choose to do that. But ultimately, I think it took me 2 minutes, and I was like, I realised from this that all countries should have both a masculine and feminine head of state. And so as I continue to meditate, is it okay for our company to be run just, or rather led and sort of controlled by a man? And I realised that if I loved this company properly and if I was willing to nurture this company properly, then I would need a female co-founder. But also, given 49% is not acceptable, but it has to be 50%. And so having since made that decision, it's like this kind of fountain of love has just swept through the company, and it's just been amazing to see, I think...
Wait, so you have that?
Yeah. So I would encourage any other, company owners and leadership teams to recognise that it's not just that there's a huge amount of statistical evidence to support the idea that a proper, gender balance within an organisation is really good for productivity, it's really good for a whole range of things, but it's from an energetic perspective, it's essential. I'm very in touch with my feminine side, but I'm still a man, and I have a predominantly masculine approach to business and a masculine approach to life, and I need to be balanced out basically.
But sorry, do you see a difference in like more a corporate world or a startup scales up family businesses? Because when I had a very much a corporate background, and which is often a very toxic organization, but that you got a lot of opponent from females actually in the business, and that the men are much more supportive in that sense, but the females see you as a threat, so they have to fight for their place, and so it's often toxic, what I find. But I don't know if you see that difference in corporate against startup, scale up, NGO.
Me, no. Okay. But I accept that I might be the exception.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? First of all, I just want to endorse what you said. I founded my business with my wife. It's called Plain Tiger, and it is just remarkable how we look at things so differently. And that different perspective means that ultimately we come back with better decisions and better results because of it. So completely endorse what you said. And my question is around, in an environment like many big businesses where people are not ready to talk about energy in the boardroom, how do you convey and convince people that it is a real thing that can uplift their business for better outcomes in every single sphere of its influence?
Who wants to take this one first?
Can you just repeat, what did you say, energy?
Yeah, so in a lot of the boardrooms of the biggest companies in the world, and even the smaller ones, people aren't ready to talk about energy.
Yeah, so I was thinking about this last night, just having worked in 2 big corporations, and although the terminology energy may not be used, I think one can couch it in terms of innovation. And the reason I say this is those who embody feminine energy are often leading from the sidelines. They are often not part of certain conversations. They are bringing different stakeholders together. Because they have to hang back, they can hear things in the silences that others cannot. So that creativity, that agility, and that different perspective you spoke about, I think really adds to the character of innovation at an organization. We just need more people to capture it, champion it, recognize it as such. And I think the door will open for greater feminine energy. That's at least my hypothesis.
If I could just, when you talk about large companies, corporations, etc., right, you can't ignore the difference between profit and shareholder value. And I think that also plays a lot into how a board or top management, executive management will work within those corporations. They have a different responsibility that kind of supersedes. And that's where we're seeing the conversation happen more and more now too, is how important is shareholder value versus actual impact in terms of the ESG, right?
So I want to answer this question a little bit from an emotional intelligence standpoint. I do emotional intelligence consulting in these corporate or startup spaces where, we don't talk about the unspoken. We don't talk about the white elephant in the room. We talk about what needs to be done and, the business plan to get there. And yet we often forget we're all human. Right? We're all having this human experience. And so when you can open yourself to touch someone else's human experience, even if it's just that, hey, how are you? Like, how actually are you?
Exactly.
That sense of wanting to know, getting outside of ourselves. So some of you have done evolutionary work, about the small self and the large self. So as you get out of your small self and you you avail yourself for someone in front of you, and you really sit with what is for them, then that emergence, the feminine principle, has to come, right? Because you're opening the space for it. And so in these boardrooms or wherever it is, how do you bring humanity back into it? And it might make people uncomfortable at first, right? But if you're there with that nervous system ganglia around your heart, active and lighting up, there's a field, right? And you talked about energy and asked about energy, and if you've studied biology, you know about morphogenetic fields, right? That's what keeps a flock of birds together, a school of fish together. I facilitate something called family constellations. If you've done that before, highly recommended work by Bert Hellinger. It shows how we humans too have a field. And just like at the beginning of this session when we opened all together, we changed the energy in the room, right? And in my institute, we run a very grounded, embodied program where we don't use that esoteric terminology because we find it largely unhelpful, because it can also be disembodied. And we are here to embody this and spread this. And as like any field, it will start to fall in line.
But how then can you make sure that diversity and inclusion, health and well-being is not just a tick the box that has to be on the website, but it's actually lived and breath in the organization, which is often not that. How to make that change? Showing it. This is the kind of if slaughterhouses had glass walls kind of philosophy. Like take people down to their employees who are miserable. But it's often asked not to do so because last year I overcome cancer, which I also lost my job. A lot of people say, do not mention it, be tough, be strong, whereas I think it's not a weakness that you are ill, it's like, how do you deal with that? But it's like, do not mention it, do not talk about it. Yeah, in that space, if I were you there, if I were giving you advice, if you asked for advice, I would say like, hey, what are you actually feeling when they tell you not to mention it? How can you drop into the feeling of it rather than fighting back and saying, no, it's important for me? And be like, is this not an important part of the human experience?
I have a question. Actually, we are doing a new drive forward in the direction of existential leadership. What I learned was, in the past I was a CEO, which was you have to do this, this, and this, and this, just come on and control. And with these learnings, which we did, it was amazing achievement that we step back, that we start to listen, start to reduce our ego. Yeah? And if you do that, it opens up your heart. And with my workers, for example, I changed completely the environment. So on the beginning, they were really a little bit shocked. What's going on with this guy? He's completely different. You know, he's crazy or what? Maybe you have to call the doctor or something. No, but it was so amazing. It's like before, you know, you're steering a big ship. You're on the bridge on the ship, and normally you just have with remote control and stuff like that with your crew. When it's let's say quiet water, no let's say difficulties in front of the ship, you come down from the bridge, be with your crew, right? Help them, serve them, bring them coffee, say how good they are, bring their strengths out, instead of pressing all the time in the wand, you know, which it hurts them and make them small. No, bring the beauty up. And you can't believe what you can achieve with this. This was just amazing. My people, I tell you, they staying here until 9 o'clock in the evening when it's necessary. They don't argue nothing. I just said, look, we have to achieve that. On the way, how we have to do it, it's up to you. Yeah? So everybody is, let's say, our own little CEO. And the paradigm shift is really that we go from command and control, we go in an attitude where we're guiding people 360 degrees. And this is the beauty of the women, let's say, energy, because women can, let's say, guiding 360 degrees when they birth a child and raise them up and stuff like that, you know. And this is from bottom up. And this is what I would like to bring to you.
Super, thank you.
So,
I want to ask, on a similar vein, success stories from our panelists and ways that you've seen, obviously in your own company, but perhaps in any of your customers or any of the corporations you've worked with or since then, and anything that you've perhaps advised, you know, family offices or other things to change, and you've seen that success. What does it look like? Are there stories?
I really like what you said.
Hans Martin.
Hans Martins. I really loved your story. Thank you for sharing. I think, for example, what we're doing today in terms of, instead of us being the panelists, the experts, and you guys are listening, you know what I mean? I mean, like, this is a conversation. This type of energy or dynamic, I think is super helpful. So I feel like when I do it in meetings or presentations, the results just, everybody's engaged. Everybody wants to help. Everybody's present, because it's not like, I know what I'm talking about. It's like, we're trying to figure this out together. And so actually I think that what we're doing here is exactly what works best in meetings, whether it's with a family office or a venture capitalist or whatever. It's that same dynamic that then we find solutions together because we're both engaged. We're both thinking about it, and there's no expert or whatever. It's like, we're just trying to figure it out. So yeah.
At Salesforce, I feel the leadership has really taken, you know, social impact into consideration, and they really built it into their DNA, and it's attracted a certain kind of individual, a lot of purpose-driven employees who want to make change in one area or the other. And so they've created these tracks really where you can focus on climate change or, you know, whatever human rights, whatever speaks to you, and collaborate with other individuals. So I think that building, you know, social impact or into your DNA is not as theoretical as we think it is. I think leaders have a huge influence on the permission that employees feel to act on their purpose and their passion. So that's one thing. And on a more personal note, you know, where I've been able to connect the most with my boss, previous boss, has been on hikes. So he would take us on these hikes, and the type of ideation that we had in nature, walking together, just spending time together without sort of technology, as you mentioned, was the type of collaboration and ideation we didn't have over, you know, conference calls, over work meetings, no matter how beautiful the building is, no matter how great the food is. It's totally different to be immersed in nature, I think.
So I think that one of the primary characteristics of the feminine is nurturing energy, and I think that you know, your company, unless you're an organisation that has vast amounts of assets, a lot of companies now don't have assets, and the whole kind of business model's changed, and you know, companies are really about people. And you know, if you ask a sophisticated investor what they're looking for in a company, team is like it's the first three principles are team, and team. And you know, you need to nurture your team just like you need to nurture your customers and your whole ecosystem. And I think. You know, a man running a company by himself will have a certain approach to his team, which, without the influence of feminine principles like nurturing, is going to be very suboptimal. And I think that when, for example, our team started to get more gender balanced, and for example, our offer letters to our team were generated by having the nurturing energy put into the offer letters. You know, team members are that much more likely to, you know, start their first day of work with a real feeling of, you know, this organisation does actually care about me. It's not just lip service. And so I think, you know, energy, feminine energy channeled into things like internal communications, external communications can change absolutely everything. And people may not even understand what's happening when they're reading this material, but it's just like, wow, I really feel that, you know. Also, I remember a few years ago attending a talk by former chairman of Greenpeace, and he said that because he was the chairman of Greenpeace, he was able to pick up the phone to absolutely anybody, and anybody would answer his phone calls. And he said that he'd spoken to all the heads of all the food companies, pretty much all the major food companies on the planet, and they'd all independently agreed that the whole system was going to collapse. And he said that he recognised that regenerative agriculture was pretty much the only thing that was worth spending time on. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but and he said that he stepped down as chairman of Greenpeace because he realised that every day spent not working on regenerative agriculture was a day lost. And you know, God only knows the volume of data he had access to draw his conclusions, right? So regenerative, right? Regenerative agriculture. Regenerative is very much a feminine principle, and another thing is that if you try and like the kind of status quo, the you know, the petrochemical industry or whatever it is that's if you try and destroy that in any way, it has its immune system response, which it's actually counterproductive to try and attack it in any way. Whereas in theory, the appropriate response is not to try and is not revolution but renaissance, building something in its place, something that you know, takes over basically and makes it redundant. And so regenerative, renaissance, both of them. Naître, for example, French verb is about birth, right? And birth is again female characteristic, feminine characteristic. So you know, in terms of like what we've got to do as a species, in terms of protecting our ecosystem, protecting our own species, all species, it's you know, it has to be led by the feminine ultimately, because you know, the primary activities that we're trying to carry out are based on feminine principles. It's really important for everyone to understand.
Okay, so quick, we have about 10 minutes left, and I do want to take your questions, but everyone raise your arms over your head, take a nice deep inhale. Exhale through your mouth. Stretch up one arm really high. Come on, dude in the back, touch the ceiling. Yes, that's you. Other arm really high. Yeah, touch it. Good. And come back down. Notice the shift in your physiology. Notice your attention gathering a little bit more. Yeah, this is important stuff. And we're kind of giving you the blueprint, and you're emerging the blueprint, whether it's decentralized leadership, whether it's regenerative agriculture, whether it's dropping into your nervous system, whether it's audience inclusion, right, whatever it is. And so make sure that you're really logging this, and it's not just another one of these talks that you go to at Davos. I want this to be applicable to your lives. And I'm going to make it really applicable to your lives. Are you ready?
Oh yeah.
Are you?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'd like to invite both your mother and your father into the room. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. Yeah. See them, feel them. Maybe feel them from your 5-year-old self. Ooh. Anyone have a little cringe there? Dad? Oh. Mama. Yeah, whatever it is, feel that. And then open your eyes if they're closed and become aware that everyone else in the room just had an experience like that. And some people's fathers were really awful. Some people's mothers also were frigid and unloving. And that is speaking through those people every second of every day. And the more that you can allow yourself to see that when someone speaks to you, and not the board's agenda or what they think about what you should or shouldn't say, and you remember where it's coming from and who they were rebirthed from, that will birth in you compassion. And that's also a key on this path. So I'd like to ask our panelists a moment where you dropped into a deeper state of compassion and thus were able to hold the vessel for the feminine. You can change the order.
I'm not sure I'm ready to answer that.
You've been asked. You're ready.
Okay, so I already said that I had meditated repeatedly on, was it okay for the company to be run just by a man, and eventually realised that it wasn't, and realised that I had to find a female co-founder and give her 50%, and that's pretty scary, you know, to give up 50% of your company. I've been in the position before where you know, you get deadlock in board meetings because you can't reach consensus. It doesn't matter how many times you rediscuss the same topic. It's an impasse. You get to an impasse, and so in order to alleviate that problem, because that, I mean, stagnation is fatal for a company, right? You have to move forward. And so how do you break the deadlock? The answer is someone has to have a controlling vote. And if I have the controlling vote, that defeats the point of giving 50% to somebody, right? I have to then find somebody else who has the controlling vote. What that means is that I can be outvoted suddenly on anything. That's pretty alarming for somebody who's just built a company from scratch, and you know. So thankfully, I've got people in the team who I can rely on to have their better judgment. But eventually, when I realised that I did have this obligation to give 50% of my company to a woman, and then having made that decision to do that, so that was about a month ago, and it's been nothing but bliss ever since. Was that helpful?
I have a completely different example. It's more from the neurodiversity space. So I've been trying to learn more and more about neurodiversity, and because of some personal interactions I've had, and I've had to draw from feminine energy in two ways. One is just to recognize that people differ in their capacity to be in touch with their emotion and manifest it because of background, what they've experienced, maybe even how they're born and put together. So not taking it in a sort of reactive, territorial, power-driven way and learning to let go of certain things and not let it affect my self-image or my ego is part of it. And then also recognizing that some people play the role of quotedly, quote, taking the hit in order to keep groups together, companies together, families together. And so looking at it more from that perspective as opposed to taking, responses personally, and recognizing that neurodiversity is into few categories, but that we're all different from each other in the way in which we process information and how it manifests in our responses and how we treat other people.
I have an example from yesterday, fresh in my mind. So yesterday we went on a hike, and there was a moment where we were 20 minutes late. So I had to decide: do we wait for the rest of the group or do we go? And people had been waiting already for 20 minutes. I was like, okay, we gotta go. So I made a decision: we go. But I was so overwhelmed at that moment because there's so many people that I forgot to tell people that we were going. So anyway, then I got a lot of angry messages being like, what, you left? You didn't even tell us which hiking route you're taking? And I'm like, anyway, so then I come out and like my partner and the person I work with the most in our organization, I come down the mountain and she's furious. She's like fuming. And I was like, well, I better let her cool down. So I was just kind of like waiting for her to cool down. I didn't go to her right away. And then eventually I go to her and she's furious. She's just like, communication! And she was right. And so in that moment I was just like, and I was so scared. I was like, oh my God, what's gonna happen now? Is she gonna kick me out? I don't know, your mind just goes in like crazy places. And then I just sat there and I just waited. And then I waited. And then eventually she calmed down, and then I just felt like in that moment, instead of taking it personally, yes, I made a mistake, I did, but I just kind of, sat with it and held compassion. So that was a fresh example in my mind.
Beautiful. Yeah, I mean, I think that's full circle, because it all comes back to our nervous system. The moment that we're in flight or fight, yeah, or even worse, if someone's constantly in flight or fight, do you know people like that? Then they'll go into an even higher regulation of freeze. Yeah, and that's rigor mortis. That's what an animal does before it's about to die, to numb themselves so they don't feel anything. Right? We're humans, we're meant to be feeling, and trust me, the feminine feels. And so this sense of knowing that we need to wait, and this is with your children, your partner, right, your parents, in the workplace, your co-founder, right? Not talking when anyone's dysregulated, and waiting instead till we come back to a state of regulation so that we can meet in the space of social engagement and thus safety. And if we create work, if we create space, if we create revolution, renaissance from there, right, then this can be possible. Yeah. So it's a beautiful tip. It's a beautiful tip. Yeah. I wanna thank Tiffany for this space and everyone else who helped to put it together and put it on. I want to thank our panelists for your beautiful sharing and yourselves. Thank you for an active audience. And in the 30 seconds that we have left, I want to spend it how we started. So look around, wipe the smile off your face, just be human. Yeah. See if you can find someone else in the room who's willing to be human with you. And spend that extra breath looking into their eyes. See if it, takes you to that space right before you want to look away, and stay and see what happens. Notice your own breath. And you've been saved by the bell. If you want more of that, come join me at 8 a.m. tomorrow at the Medical Psychedelic House of Davos. Thank you to our panelists.